Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. The Bet with the Best podcast is sponsored by Amwager, an ADW built by horse players for horse players. Speed, power, and ease of use are at the core of Amwager, designed to give players the information and tools they need to quickly make anything from a simple win bet to a complex, structured superfecta or pick five wager. When you combine that with data and pool updates that are up to 60 times faster than the competition, Amwager is the clear winner in wagering on races online. Those are just a few of the many special features that Amwager has to offer, along with live video and race replays, free, integrated form-to-win past performance information, conditional wagering, and true odds, which are a prediction of off odds based on all available pool data. That and much more. Amwager is licensed and operated in the U.S., and best of all, they will actually pay you to play. If you sign up now and deposit and bet $150, you will earn a $150 lump sum bonus. So there is no reason not to give Amwager a try. If you want to bet with the best, then you need the best tools to wager with. You need Amwager. Welcome to episode 23 of the Bet with the Best podcast. Joining us this week is a professional horse player, or at least a retired professional horse player, and author of many publications, including the books Money's Secrets at the Racetrack and The Skeptical Handicapper. It's my pleasure to introduce Barry Meadows. Welcome to the show, Barry.
Thank you, Chris. It's fun being here. Let's have some fun today.
Yeah, we the listeners won't know, but we had a little difficulty getting this going. So let's cross our fingers and hope we can keep this going. So, we talked about earlier before the show, I like to start things off with a horse player origin story, how you got started as a horse player and how that led to your career as a horse player. And so why don't you please share with the listeners your horse player origin story?
I started off in the 5th grade. There was a show on TV called Racing from Yonkers. I'd never seen a harness horse. I was from the suburbs. We had no horses in the neighborhood. My parents had zero interest in gambling. Neither did any of my friends. But I found looking at all these horses named Hanover interesting for some reason. And I convinced a few other kids in the class to start betting on these horses. Here's what we did. You bet 5 cents for each winner you had. So if I had 4 winners and somebody else had 5, I'd have to pay him a nickel. If somebody else only had 3, he'd have to pay me a nickel. I noticed after a couple of weeks, this one kid kept winning most of the time. I figured out that he was buying a newspaper which had somebody's selections, which is my first inkling that if you have a little bit more and better information than your opponents, you have some advantage. And since I was mathematically inclined, I thought, yeah, I think this thing could work out for me. I like this stuff.
So one of the kids was a Sharpie in your first little betting gang there, huh?
That's right. Remember, you're always playing against other people. You're not playing against some unseen corporation. It's other people. So if you're at the track and you look around, do you think I can beat these people or not? And if you say I can, you're well on your way.
Yeah, the one-eyed man is the king of the blind. So that kind of thing. Although that was your introduction. But so how did you go from playing the harness and playing in your little harness pool with your classmates? So how old were you when you were doing that?
I was pretty young. I was 10. But I started borrowing and buying these harness racing books. You know, how to win in harness racing, how to select winners, that kind of thing. So I amassed a bunch of books. I found the whole thing fascinating. Of course, I was too young to go to the track, That didn't take place till I was 16. Of course, I looked like I was 12, but luckily they didn't enforce the rules about being 21, which is what they had in New York, where I was living at the time. So sometimes I would go on a bus to Yonkers. The guys on the bus had all played at Aqueduct in the afternoon. Now they're picking up people to go to Yonkers at night. They're smoking. They're old. They're always in a foul mood because they've just lost in the afternoon. But they then on the way they would get a little bit more excited, saying, "Oh, I got this horse in the fourth race, etc." Then on the way home they were silent again. So I think we know what happened to most of them. But that's how I got to the track when I first started. I always went by myself. I never went with friends. Maybe I didn't have that many friends, but I don't think I had too many people interested in harness racing besides me. But I was interested, so I took it to the next step. I just learned as much as I could about it. I learned how to watch races. Of course, at the beginning, I was just happy to be there. And of course, I had no clue how to bet. The first bet I ever made was on a stakes horse. I bet $5 to win, 40 to place, and 20 to show. Don't ask me where those numbers came from. They make no sense whatsoever under any possible betting system. But that's what I bet. And the horse won. He paid a gigantic $290 to win, I think. It was obviously a big favorite. But I think that got me going. I said, well, you know what? If you learn about this, I think you could do something with it. Although I had no idea what at the time because I was so young. Then when I got to college, I used to subscribe to Horseman and Fair World, so I get the results every week from races around the country to try to keep up. And then I started going to tracks where I was in the Navy, and I was stationed in different places. I went to the harness races if I was near a place that had a racetrack, and I just like doing it. College, I used to hitchhike 2 hours to get to the harness track. Probably not the best idea for my health to do that, but when you want to see the races, you figure out how to do it.
Yeah, that's a little bit more difficult to get a bet down than it is today.
Well, yeah, now you can bet on your watch now pretty much. So everything has changed. It's a lot easier for players to bet now. Of course, that only means that for most people they'll lose money that much faster.
Yeah, there's definitely is that potential. So you started out in the harness world. How did you transition, and why did you transition from harness racing to thoroughbred racing? And what did you learn, at starting out in harness racing that carried over that helped you become a better horse player with the thoroughbreds?
Well, I was in the Navy for 4 years. And when I got out, I needed a job. I didn't have a job. So I applied for a place called National Armstrong, which put out a harness racing sheet. And the guy says, okay, handicap today's card, put down the odds you think these horses should be, and write some comments about them. So that was my test. And I got the job. Not that I had a bunch of winners, but I guess my odds were fairly accurate. So I wound up working there for 6 months. And then they said, well, we're going to have to cut back. You're the newest employee, so you have to go. And that was on a Friday. And Friday afternoon, after I left Armstrong, I called up American Turf Monthly because I've been writing some articles for them. And they said, oh, it's so good you call because we need a new editor for our publication. Our editor, we fired him today. I said, well, I think I can do that job. So I was writing articles at the same time that I was gambling and working for a publication. Little did I know that years and years later, I'd be writing articles for American Turf Monthly again. So I guess I've really made no progress in my life. But at the time, it was interesting and different. I met a bunch of people over there. And then I was there for about 6 months. And I said, you know what? I think I'd like to teach tennis up in the Catskills because I played a lot of tennis. And I wound up getting the job up there pretty close to Monticello Raceway, the harness track over there. And I usually I'd work during the day at the tennis courts, and then at night I'd go to the harness races. And eventually I wound up buying some horses with the earnings I made as a tennis instructor. So I learned a little bit about the game from the inside. But I was always learning. I was always trying to watch races. And it's funny because now when I think of how little I knew then, it was amazing. I played somewhere around break even the time I was working up there. But eventually I moved to California because I thought I was going to be a TV writer. Obviously, I was switching careers left and right. I got a partner. We got an agent. My plan was to come out here to California and write sitcoms. Only later I discovered nobody thought I was very funny, so that was a problem. So I had to make money somehow, because by this time I was married, and I said to myself, I think I better actually make money as a job. And I'd had a kid by this point too. So I said, I think I'll bet the harness races over at Hollywood Park. They were racing at Hollywood Park. Sometimes they'd race at Los Alamitos. Every once in a while, they'd race at Del Mar. So this was my brilliant money-making scheme. When I realized I was not going to be a sitcom writer, I wrote a couple of scripts with my partner. We sold a few things, but not enough to sustain it as a career. So I decided to go into the harness races was my best way to make money. And so for the next 5 years, I was playing at the harness races full time. I didn't have any other job. Every once in a while, I'd write an article for a magazine about something. But generally speaking, I was at the track every night, learning about harness racing and, getting better. I met a bunch of people. I met a couple of professional players there. And at that point, they had these big 6-pick pools over at Hollywood Park. I said, for thoroughbreds, I said, you know what? I think there's more money to be made at the thoroughbreds. I made money at the harness races, sustaining my little family. But I said, I can make a lot of money at the thoroughbreds. So I switched over to the thoroughbreds. And of course, I began betting like I was betting at the harness races, a bunch of money, which was not too smart because I didn't know all that much. So it took me a while. It was a learning curve. The first year, I lost a bunch of money. The second year, I broke even except for some pick six losses. So I said, okay, I think I got this now. And then by the third year, I started making a bunch of money, and I just kept going for the next 18 years after that. I played every day until 2011 when I retired.
So when you made that transition to the thoroughbreds, what was the toughest part of that? What did you have to change in your handicapping approach, going from harness to thoroughbred? What was the biggest difference, and what could you carry over from the harness to the thoroughbreds?
Yeah, it was completely different. It would be like comparing basketball and baseball. They both played with the ball. You both have to get a higher score than your opponents. Other than that, there's nothing relatable. So harness, the one thing I took from harness, which always stood me in good stead at the thoroughbreds, was that races happen between horses who like to be in certain positions. And if you could figure out where a horse was going to be in the race, that gave you a big edge. And of course, especially I discovered in turf races, more so than dirt races, I'd always try to plot the course of the race. And that I learned from harness racing. And of course, the trainer is more important in thoroughbred than he is in harness. Harness, the driver is more important than the jockey is. Post one is often not a good post at the thoroughbreds, but it's a very good post at the harness races. So there's a lot of new stuff I had to learn. So I had to unlearn stuff and learn new stuff. I met some people. I read some more books. And also what I did when I first started is I would call up a line. At that time, there was a line run by Bob Sullivan where he and his partner, Jeff Siegel, would analyze the card every day, picking the horses they liked, why they liked horse A, why they didn't like horse B. And you could call up and get a free replay at the end of the day. Of course, they would charge if you called up before the races. So every day I would listen to why they liked horse A, why they didn't like horse B. And that was a help too. There were also publications like Today's Racing Digest, which analyzed every race very thoroughly. And those helped me learn how to handicap, plus all the books I was reading. I read every book I could find about thoroughbred handicapping. And that was those were big helps too. Even if it turned out later, I said, I got to discard most of this stuff because a lot of this stuff is not exactly as depicted. And I always kept learning. And the other thing besides plotting the race was in the harness, I would watch the replays religiously and try to figure out what happened to every horse, why he was in this position, not in a different position. And the thoroughbreds, I became an expert at watching replays. That was my number one skill. I watched every replay in Northern and Southern California every day. So I had a very good feel for who these horses were. And eventually what I did is I developed a method to rate each horse, and I'd revise my ratings each day, depending on how the horse performed that day, where it fit into his overall record. So putting numbers on horses and plotting the course of a race were the two most important takeaways I got from doing harness racing. Pretty much everything else I could discard.
So your ratings on horses, what were the major elements that behind the rating? I mean, you don't have to go through the whole process, but like, what are the main factors that you would, analyze to develop that rating for a horse?
Well, there are a number of things. Who beat who? What were their times? Because I developed my own part times, pace, and final time for every class at every distance at the track. And I would use those to see how close they were to those times. Is the horse getting better or worse, which I had to make a subjective judgment on? What class is he entered? Was he entered in a different class this time? Why was he entered in a different class? Looking at each race, I rated each race. I gave each race a number so I could see where it fit into his performance cycle, where he was going in life. Is he a horse that's really going somewhere? Is he on the tail end of his career? And what odds he went off what odds he went off? Because, for example, if I had two horses rated 14 and one of them went off at 4-5 and the other was 20-1, something was probably off with my numbers. So it took me a while to get my numbers really accurate. I would say probably a year before I was happy with him. And that was changing him each day based on performances. And performances, I did adjustments, variance. I did adjustments of every horse's time. I also subscribed to a couple of publications that did their own numbers so I could see what the difference was between what I was doing and what they were doing. And eventually, I'd say it took me about a year to be happy with my ratings and to be happy with what I was doing at the thoroughbreds.
So now you've been at it for a few years. You've developed some confidence. You've got a process. You're rating these horses. You're focused. It sounds like you're focused just on the Southern California circuit then. Is that correct?
I did Southern and Northern California because horses would ship both ways. And I was very cognizant of the pace of every race. So which pace benefited horses, which pace did put them at a disadvantage. So I would kind of correct their numbers. That was a factor as well. So I just kept working on those numbers, making the numbers as accurate as I could, not just for that race, but how it fit into the horse's overall thing. One thing I learned was a bad race doesn't make a horse a bad horse, and a good race doesn't make him a great horse either. It's consistency. And I was amazed at how often these horses would run very similar numbers, even if it looks like to the public the numbers were very, very different. A horse that finished second might have actually looked worse than the horse that finished sixth in the race. And by watching races day after day, and I was watching them late at night when everybody else was asleep, I really got a good feel for how good every horse was. And of course, by this time, everything was in a computer. So I could very quickly look up each horse's record with my comments on each race. So I'd have the name of the horse, and I'd have the number I gave him for that race, and then a comment about that race in shorthand. I didn't write a whole long thing, but shorthand, so I know, was he wide? How wide was he? Was he blocked? Did he have nothing when he got free? Did he look like he was improved? Did he look athletic? Things like that you pick up from watching horses hour after hour, day after day. Just like if you have a dog at home, you get to know what he's like by being around that dog all the time. And by being around these horses, I learned about them. I learned who liked to do certain things, who didn't like to do other things, what positions they prefer to be in, and how they like to race, and what benefited them and what didn't benefit them.
So you now got to the point where you feel like you can analyze a race and rate the horse's ability and compare the horses and see how the race you think is going to unfold. So let's talk a little bit about how you take your handicapping opinion and then you convert it into a bet. How did you do that? What sort of pools did you focus on? Were you a vertical player, horizontal player, wind player, exotics? I mean, kind of the betting side, how you went from, that handicapping opinion to a good bet.
Well, I learned a lot about betting doing the harness races. So the betting was actually transferable. But as far as when I would finish working on a race, I would, as all players do, who do you like better? I like number 1 better than number 4, for example. I like 5 better than 8, or I like 7 better than 2. So I had to figure out who I liked in what order and how close they were. You can't say because, okay, I make the horse the favorite. You can't say, well, I make him 2-1. Well, I don't know. Who is he against in that race? Maybe I make him 3-5. Maybe I only make him 4-1, depending on the opposition. So I was always comparing the horse with his situation that day, because he's in a race against horses. It's not a straight line. So the race is going to take place based on who's in the race and what happens during the race. As far as translating it to bets, I always made a line for each race, as I had done at the harness races. So I knew which horses were under bet and which were over bet. Now, if I made a horse 2-1, which means I gave him roughly a 33% chance of winning the race, and he went off at 2-1, there was no reason to bet. There was no advantage. If he went off at 7-2, though, now I had a decent advantage, and now I could make that bet. And by having a safety factor, I used 50% over my number, which does not give you a 50% edge by any means, but it gives you some edge if you're right often enough. Because the bad news is underlays always win more than overlays. In other words, the horses that you overrate don't win as much as you think they should, and horses you underrate probably win more than they think you should, which I discovered by keeping exact records of every odds I had on a horse through hundreds of races. So I knew if I made a horse 4-1, maybe he'd win 20%, maybe he'd win 17%, but he was not going to win 50%, and he wasn't going to win 5%. So that helped make my lines more accurate because you're always betting off your own line. As far as which pools, it depends on the situation for the race. Maybe the horse was an overlay in the win pool and he was an underlay in the place and show pool. Maybe he was higher in exactas. Maybe he was 5-1 in exactas and only 4-1 in the win pool. So I was always checking every pool to see where the value was. And sometimes that would mean playing daily doubles. Let's say I didn't like the favorite in the second half of the double. What a great time to play the double. I could leave the favorite out, take a shot with the horse I liked in the first leg, and maybe use them with maybe my 2, 3, and 4 pick in the second race and leave the favorite out altogether. Other times, the races were obvious. If they're too obvious, there was nothing to play because you can't simply imitate what the public does because there's a takeout involved. So I was looking for situations where I had some kind of advantage based on how the races shaped up. If the race was a wide open race, maybe I had an opinion. Maybe I didn't have to use all 7 horses who might win. Maybe I could get away with only using 2 and spread in some of the other races. Maybe not. Every situation was different. So I approached each day as a new day with a new set of races and new set of possible betting opportunities. But one thing I always did is when I wrote down the horses I liked for the day, I always put the win odds I would accept for that horse. And if he was below that number, I wasn't betting him. I don't care how much I liked him. Didn't matter. I had to make sure that I was getting the proper price. And the proper price doesn't mean you're playing 10-1 shots all the time. I played plenty of favorites. If I made a horse 4-5 and he went off at 7-5, great. I made a big bet on that horse. Because you can actually bet more on the lower odds horses than you can on the higher odds horses because your losing streaks are going to be shorter. I don't care if you're the best handicapper ever lived. Sometimes you're going to lose 20 in a row on favorites. Forget about 15-1 shots. So you have to have enough money to last through those losing streaks because you never know when they're going to happen. So basically that's what I did. I set a line for every race. Every horse had a number. I didn't play my 7th choice in the race, of course, because it's easier to make a mistake if I make the horse 15-1, maybe I should have made him 12-1. Those are difficult choices. But if you say I made him 6-5, I didn't make him 4-1, that's a very easy thing to do. So I usually played one of my top 4 choices, more often than not my top choice, but sometimes my second choice, sometimes my third choice. And every once in a while, there'd be a race where I had no line. I didn't like the horses in the race. I had no real opinion, and I'd still wind up betting the race. One of the big scores that I made, because I played a lot with offshore books, especially when I played Golden Gate, because big bets at Golden Gate would move the numbers. There was a race I had no real interest in, but I said, well, I like to watch every race while it was going on live. And there was a horse there that just, his odds kept going up. I go, it was a maiden claimer. They're all terrible horses. This horse at least showed some early speed his last race. I go, you know what? This horse isn't that bad. His odds just kept going up and going up and going up and going up. He went off going off at 42-1. And I bet the maximum I could at that book, which was $300 to win and $300 to place. That's all they would take. And the horse wound up drawing off by a length and a half. And I made $17,000 on a race I had no interest in the morning, simply by paying attention and noticing something was out of whack. So I wanted to watch every race, whether I was going to bet that race or not, because occasionally I would bet a different horse than the one I thought I was betting in the morning, because the odds wound up being different. But I was always looking for something where there was some advantage to me playing that horse. If there was no advantage, no overlay, I wasn't playing. And I could sit through races. I could sit through 4, 5, 6 races, which luckily eventually Betfair and betting against horses, the betting exchanges, became popular, and they were legal for U.S. players for a number of years. And I just hammered those puppies every day.
Okay, so I want to go. You said a lot there, so I want to kind of go back to a few things and ask a little more. One is, you made a real good explanation of how you had an odds line for every race. You put a price on at least your top 3 or 4 horses. I don't know if you did it for every horse, but
it depends. Some races I did. Some I just grouped them. As
right. So
non-contenders.
So you had that.
Yeah.
And that you could execute a win bet based on that. But you also talked about exactas and place and show. How did you determine whether you were getting you had an overlay in the place pool or the show pool? If this involves a lot of math, we can skip it. But I mean,
not really. But I just used my charts that I had in Money Secrets at the Racetrack. I had my chart with me.
I was trying to prime you to talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So. And for example, I have a chart here. It says if I made the horse 4 to 5, if he had less than 29.9% of the place pool and less than 26.6% of the show pool, I could bet him up to that level. Now, the problem was, as time went on, people got less interested in betting place and show, so the pools were small, especially at a place like Golden Gate. So sometimes if I bet, I would have to bet in places where the money didn't show up in the pool. But at the bigger tracks like Santa Anita on a Saturday, you could still bet in those pools with no problem. So I simply used that chart, which it's funny. I just went over some records, in preparation for this show, and I had some interesting totals because I recorded every single bet I made over the years, and so this way I could see how I actually was doing versus how I believed I was doing. Because a lot of us, unfortunately, kid ourselves. We think we're winning and we're not, or we remember the big score we made and we forgot all the losing bets we made. So what I did is every day I would, at the end of the day, record how much I bet in each pool, how much I bet, and how much I collected. How many of those bets won? How many of those bets lost? And I could tell you even now, I'm typing it as we speak on my computer. I could tell you, for example, I'm going to give you some interesting things here. Here's the amount I bet to win. It's starting with, I started putting in the computer in 1990. So this went on for 21 years. Okay.
I'm just trying to think back what my computer was in 1990 at home. I think it was like a little Macintosh with a screen about the size of a postage
stamp. I got my first computer in 1984 before I even knew what I was going to do with it. I saw there was some thing. Now I'm noticing here, here's the total for my win bets, okay? 3.4 million. I have it to the exact dollar, but I'll just round it off. I bet 3.4 million and I returned 3.4 million. I actually lost a couple of $1,000, but since I was getting rebates of 8, 10, sometimes even higher percent, I was able to make a lot of money doing that simply by breaking even. So for every win bet, I got back, every win dollar, I got back 99 cents. For every place dollar, I got back $1.02. For every show dollar, where I bet $1, I got back 99 cents. So that was plenty. That was easy enough for me to make money once these rebates came in. And the rebates started coming in at the time I was playing thoroughbreds. So, of course, I signed up for these rebate shops, and it varied which one I was playing from time to time. When I was betting the most amount of money, I was playing at RGS down in St. Kitts. But I played at a number of these places because sometimes they give you a little bit better deal at place A and place B. And if I was losing 1%, I was getting back 8, 9, 10% on the play. That was a very, very profitable business. And I actually made money. I figured out exactly what I made altogether, which was I made 22% on the betting part. In other words, wins, betting trifectas. I made a bunch of money on trifectas and exactas and things like that. Not on the win, place, and show, as you can see, but I made 22% overall bet on the betting part. I made 41% of my money on rebates and 37% on betting exchanges where I was betting against horses. So I was getting money from every place I could using gambling to do so.
So you mentioned rebates, and that was a big part of your play. And you were a volume player then, and like you said, just by breaking even, you could still turn a pretty nice profit. And if you could churn enough money, you could make a pretty good amount of money that way.
Exactly. So I wound up, betting millions, and I wound up making a lot of money from the rebates and from the betting exchanges, where I did very well on the exchanges. I have a very good knack for getting rid of horses, which I wound up. There were two kinds of horses you could play against on the exchanges: either horses you did not think were going to win at all, or horses you thought were way over bet. Like maybe a horse went off 6-5. You said, "Nah, this horse should be 3-1." So I would bet against those horses too, and I'd win. Overall, I won 86% of my bet against. So, and that turned out to be a lot of money just on those. And I'm very sad that they kicked everybody out from the U.S. except for players in New Jersey. And it's a shame. The U.S. exchanges never really got going for a lot of different reasons. And so we didn't have a chance to use those things to help us make money, because you could bet on horses or you could bet against horses. And sometimes I bet on horses on the exchange, because maybe a horse was 6-1 on the exchange. He was only 4-1 at the track. So I could bet him on the exchange and make some extra money there. It was the greatest thing a horse player could do, is use those exchanges. And that was all taken away, which was a terrible shame as far as I'm concerned. But so that was certainly something that I enjoyed playing. And I played every day, because to bet on a horse, I maybe would have 2 or 3 races a day I was interested in. Now, maybe I would wind up betting 4 or 5 races. Maybe I'd only bet 1 race, but I was not going to bet the whole card. On exchanges, almost every race, there was at least some horse I did not like that I could eliminate. So I was playing a lot of races on the exchange, and my bets, I put a lot of money through the pools, through the windows, through my accounts, but I also put some through bookmakers. Offshore bookmakers and private bookmakers, because I wanted to sometimes get a lot of money down, and I didn't want to put it all in the window where I would kill my own price.
So with that betting, were you getting fixed odds, or were you just, that was fixed odds?
On the exchange, people are putting up a price, and you decide whether you want to or not, and those odds are always changing, because people take their bets off, or somebody accepts their other bets. So the odds were changing. You had to pay very strong attention to what numbers were up there, because they were constantly changing. So, but if you took a bet, if you bet a horse at 5-1, that's what you were going to get. You were going to get 5-1, no matter what you wound up paying at the track.
Right, but I meant outside the exchanges, when you were making bets because you wanted more liquidity. Were you getting fixed odds on those plays?
No, those I was just betting pari-mutuel like everybody else was.
And you're just getting the pari-mutuel prices and without having to affect the odds in the way you normally would.
Right. Right. Exactly. So I was playing some races I would play with bookmakers, or I play with offshore casinos, but other races I was playing right through the pools. I mean, when a big track is having a big weekend and they're handling $1 zillion, my lousy $2,000 bet's not going to affect anything very much.
Did you ever bet fixed odds with bookmakers, like in London or in the U.S.? I guess even in New Jersey, there was some fixed odds wagering for a while. Is that anything you ever got your interest, or was it primarily the exchange?
There was nothing really available at that time for me, but the exchange did have, you accepted whatever odds were up there, or you didn't. But if you took the price, that was your price. And if you laid a price, that was your price. So that was the fixed odds wagering of its time, which I began playing around 2003 is when I started playing that. And I played that the remaining 8 years that I was playing full-time thoroughbreds.
Yeah, and like you said, you could form a lot more opinions. You churned more money that way, and the takeout was significantly less.
Absolutely. We played at a place called eHorse, which is non-existent now. They had an exchange called eHorse X, and they were only taking something like it was somewhere between 2% and 5%. I don't remember what it was, because it was long ago. Compare that to what you're paying at the track.
So I want to go just back a little bit on the betting. You mentioned
Sure.
exotics like tries and exactas and doubles.
Yeah, well, those all pretty much had to put all those through the windows.
Right.
Exactas,
So how did you price those? How did you determine what were reasonable prices on those wagers?
Well, a couple of different ways. First of all, I used my charts in the book, where for example, if I made a horse 7-5 on the win end, and the horse in second, if I made him, let's say 6-1, I would just look across on my chart, and I would see that I would need $29 to play a $2 exacta on that combination. So I was looking for overlays that way. Also, sometimes I was looking for what I call lineup races, where you'd have one horse go after the lead, and then you'd have 2 or 3 horses sit behind him, everybody going real slow. The horses in the back pretty much had no chance. So I would try to figure out who was going to be where, and maybe key that top horse to win only, and maybe use the 2 and 3, and maybe horse that I thought would run fourth behind him, and throw everybody else out, even if they were good horses, because they simply couldn't get there off a slow pace. In the same way, sometimes I would play races where I remember one time I was walking around my house screaming. I got the program for Hollywood Park for a Friday night, and it was a 5.5 furlong race, I believe, if I remember correctly, on the turf. And there were 3 horses in the race. There were good horses who absolutely had to have the lead. They would go all out to get that lead. Now they were all racing together. So I said, okay, well, let me look at the horses coming from the back, and let me see if I can Dutch them. So I played different amounts on combinations using only these other horses who, remember, were not as good as these big favorites that were going to kill each other. And sure enough, mid-stretch, I knew I was home already because those guys were all starting to fade. So I was walking around my house for 2 days yelling, there's going to be a meltdown on Friday, a pace meltdown on Friday. People look at me like I was nuts, but sometimes you get races like that where you see exactly what's going to happen, who's going to be where, and that's how you can take advantage with exactas and tries, because you can get rid of horses that are going to be in losing positions, even if they're decent horses. Anybody can throw out a 60-1 shot, but throwing out a horse who is going to be second or third choice, who a lot of people are using, is really going to help you. And if you can get a favorite not to get there because you don't like the favorite, now you're talking some real money.
So let's talk about the case where you find a favorite you think is going to be a big underlay that's very vulnerable. What pools typically would you attack if you found that?
Well, I might play the win pool depending on what the odds are of the other horses. I might even play 2 horses to win occasionally if they were both middle price horses. But I'm looking to play against him, so I might play the win pool against him. I probably are going to play exactas against him. I might leave him out of the tries altogether and play tries. And if I'm right, there's some money to be made. I don't want to, hedge and say, well, he might get there, so I'll have to use him. This is what people do in pick sixes. They use every horse that's got 2 legs because they God forbid they should lose a race and they'll be out of the pick 6. So they try to use every horse that can breathe, and they wind up with tickets that are not really playable because there's too many horses in there. You have to wind up playing on somebody or against somebody at some point. You can't use everybody just because he has some shot to win the race. You have to get rid of horses that you do not like and play against them. Just because a horse maybe has Joel Rosario riding or Irad or somebody like that, or maybe is trained by Bob Baffert, sometimes you just got to get rid of these horses because they're going to get bet. If your horses are exactly the same as what the public has in the order they have them, you got nothing to play. So why play? Why should I play? There's a takeout. Some of these trifectas have a takeout of 20%, 25% even. Why should I play against that kind of takeout if my opinion of the race is the same as the public's? I'm looking for discrepancies between my opinion and the public's opinion. And those are the races I'm going to play, not the races where our opinions are exactly the same. Like I like the 6-5 favorite best and the 5-2 shot next best, and then the 4-1. No, there's nothing to play there. The place to play is when you do not like one of these well-bet horses. You should have good reasons. Maybe the horse just got 2 perfect trips. So he finished second in both his last races because he got great trips. Well, maybe he's not as good as the horse that finished 5th or 6th to him, And the people are going to see those big second place finishes, and they're going to pound them. And the horse isn't that good. So I was always looking for situations like that where I could leave a favorite out or play against him, or leave the second choice out or play against him. I didn't have that many races where I played the favorite to the second choice, with the exception of what were known in those days as house quinellas, which they don't have anymore. In a house quinella, it was a bet you could make with Nevada casinos or with bookmakers, where if your horses ran 1-2, you'd get win prize times half the place price, which I did the math on. It actually gave me a pretty strong advantage when I played two giant favorites, a 6-5 shot and a 7-5 shot. And I made a bunch of money doing that until they wound up cutting me off, which is what they do if you're winning all the time. Unfortunately, they don't let you keep playing. But of course, Betfair didn't care how often I won. I was, helping the liquidity, and eHorse X didn't care either, because I was helping keep the liquidity up for that place. They finally got rid of me when there was a race at Golden Gate one time. There were only 3 horses I thought could win. I had them all even. They'd all raced against each other. They were all very close in ability. Maybe one was a very tad better than the other, but they were all very, very close. Anyway, the public had them 2-1, 2-1, and 8-1. Well, obviously, I was going to bet the 8-1 shot. I couldn't play it at the track because I would have killed the number. So I bet 800 to win on the horse with eHorse. They let me bet that much on that race, and when the horse won, he never should have gone off that price, because he was, as good as the other 2 horses. They said, "Oh, you need to stick to the exchanges from now on. We can't just have you bet and win here." Not that every time I made a big bet, something good happened. Sometimes something bad happened when I made a big bet. But you want to remember the races you were successful at, and have a very short memory for the races you lost.
Yeah, the golf memory is what I call it. You need that as a horse player.
That's right.
You got to move on to the next shot.
If you want to look at stuff, just look at your betting records. See what your betting records say. I did it all by paper and pencil when I did the harness races. And the first 2 years I did thoroughbreds, I did them by paper and pencil. But once I got the computer program set up, everything went into the computer every day for years and years and years. So I couldn't lie to myself. And, once I had a losing year in 2006. You'd think, well, how can you have a losing year when you had all those winning? Well, anything can happen. You could go on a bad streak, and it could last not just a day, a week, a month. It could last the whole year sometimes. So you have to know how you did. But on the other hand, you don't want to endlessly replay all the mistakes you've made. Instead, you want to endlessly replay your wonderful successes. I knew a guy that one time he hit a pick six for about 10,000, and he got a tape of that day's races. And he said, every time I felt down in the future, I just played that tape. Remember how good it felt when I was successful.
I like that, because you definitely need something to help keep you going when you do hit those cold streaks. So
well, let's face it. For most of us, our wife said, well, my wife's understood what I was doing, but other wives will go, why are you gambling? You lost yesterday, you lost the day before. Why are you even out there? Or your mother says, why are you wasting your time doing this? Or your friends say, oh, that poor guy, he's at the track all the time. So you're getting a lot of negative feedback from ordinary citizens, or as I call them, the civilians. You need some positive feedback. Now, if you meet other good players, that's good. Or if you remember your wins, that's good. But you have to have something that puts you in a mode to play. You don't want to wake up and go, oh, God, I got to go over the racing form again today. I hate all these horses. I hate the whole equine breed. You don't want to be in that position. You want to feel like you're doing something you enjoy. Every day is a new opportunity of things that you weren't even expecting. And every day could be a good day. You never know when that's going to happen.
So what was your go-to for trying to keep your positive attitude?
Well, I was pretty lucky that I normally felt, since I'd done this a long time and I was successful at it, I know there's going to be times when you're on a bad streak, just like if you're a 300 hitter in baseball, sometimes you're going to strike out 4 times in a row. It's going to happen. So I'm not going to win every race. I'm not going to win most races, except betting exchanges. Then I'm going to win most races. But ordinary pari mutual bets, I'm going to lose most races. I'm going to lose most of the pick sixes I play, even if my ticket's $1,500. I'm probably going to lose that. So I accepted the fact that I was going to lose a lot, but remember that it always eventually turns around, and eventually I was going to wind up winning. And that's the way I felt. I always felt as if I was going to win. So there was no reason to stop playing until my wife retired in 2011. I said, well, I'll retire too. And I did.
So you've mentioned the pick six a couple times. Maybe talk a little bit about the way you would attack horizontal plays, and in particular, if you're playing Southern California back in the 90s, in the 80s in particular, the pick six was kind of like the big bet. So how did what was your method for going after that? What got you interested in the pick six, and how did you attack that?
Well, I got interested when there was a ton of money available in the pick six. And unfortunately for me, the first month I played, when there weren't, this is before there were carryovers, because they started the carryovers a little bit later than I started playing. I had 5 wins and a second, and I singled the second choice in one race, and he wound up finishing second, and the favorite won the race. With the favorite, the thing paid over $100,000. So I was thinking, man, I could have won a fortune today. And that encouraged me to keep playing. But I had to really kind of think about how to do this, because it's not easy. You got to make out a lot of tickets. You have to be very careful that you don't overbet. You got to be careful you're not using nothing but 6-5 and 2-1 shots in the card. You got to have some price horses in there too. And I discovered fairly quickly you need a bunch of money to play this. So what I did is I got a couple of partners. So I would either put up, depending on what year it was, I would put up either half the ticket or a third of the ticket. So we could play bigger tickets by combining I did all the handicapping and I made the tickets out, but they were full partners. So we could play bigger amounts that way. This way we could play instead of us each playing $1,000 ticket, we could play a $3,000 ticket together sometimes. Not that we'd usually play that much, but if it came up, we would. If there was a giant, let's say a big 2-day carryover or something with some price horses coming up, we could do that if we combined our money. So I actually think if you not combine picks, because everybody's going to argue, we should use the 2. No, don't use the 2. The 2 is terrible. Use the 4. Use them both. No, that's going to double the cost of the ticket. Too many arguments when people do that. Better have one person make the tickets out if you're going to have a partnership, and then make sure that people have money, because unfortunately at the track we know there are some people that say they have money and don't. But I had to figure out how to do this. Where to single, when not to single, when to use more horses in the race, when to throw out the favorite, when to single the favorite. So it took a little trial and error. Now I was doing that at the harness horses, because the harness horses are actually much easier to hit than the thoroughbreds are. The thoroughbreds are tough because the harness horses are racing every week, so there's not a lot of surprises. Thoroughbreds, you got horses coming from different tracks, horses coming off layoffs, horses switching stables a lot, horses making gigantic class plunges. So there's a lot more questions doing the thoroughbreds than there were doing the harness races. So I already had the basic idea how to do it from the harness, but I had to adjust a little bit doing the thoroughbreds. And when I finally hit a big one, which was in my third year of playing the thoroughbreds, I said, okay, I can actually do this. That's when I started feeling more confident, and I just kept going from there.
So on your pick six, it sounds like you were trying to find maybe one race where you had, or 1 or 2 races where you had a really strong opinion on a horse and you could single that horse, and then you would try to spread in races where you thought it was more wide open and the favorite was vulnerable. I mean, was it anything more than that? I mean, I'm just a little curious about, is there any sort of basic structure you would follow when you did it, or just
yes. I laid out the structures because I always used A's and B's, and sometimes C's, and sometimes there were 2 A's in a race. Sometimes there were 4 B's. But again, I made charts up in Money Secrets of the Racetrack. I simply followed the charts, how to make the tickets up, which were my A's, which were my B's, how much could I play, because those were $2. They were $2 minimum bets at that time, so the tickets mounted up pretty quick. But I wound up being successful doing that. That's not where I made most of my money, but I certainly did make a bunch of money. I could tell you to the exact dollar how much I made by looking at my computer screen here. I collected 7.1 million and I bet 6.1 millions. 710,000 is what I collected off a 613,000 bet. So I made 97,000 on pick sixes over the years. So that was part of the money I made was from playing pick sixes. But some days I didn't play pick sixes, and sometimes I'd spend 2 hours making out tickets and then do the calculations. I said, this thing can't pay anything. There's too many obvious horses here. So when I saw it's going to be nothing but first choice, second choice, third choice, which some cards are like that, I didn't play. So I didn't play every single pick six carryover, and I certainly never played when there was no carryover, once they started the carryover thing. And if I was playing today, my God, I can't believe people actually bet these jackpot bets. They're ridiculous. The only time you should play is when there's a mandatory payoff, or play the tracks that don't do this ridiculous jackpot stuff.
Yeah, you're not the first guest on the show to say that. On your A's and B's, were those like based on the likelihood of winning, or how did you define your an A versus a B versus a C?
That's a good question, because an A might be the most likely winner, or it might be the most likely horse to be an overlay, because if he's an overlay in the win pool, he's probably going to be an overlay in the other pools too. So I was always looking for that, not just who the most likely winner is, but who might be. So I might have an A that was 5-1 because I thought he wasn't going to get bet as a 5-1 shot. I thought he might go off at. I might have made the horse 5-2 or 3-1, but I think the public's going to let him go at 5-1. He's going to offer some value, so he might be an A. Other race, it might be, well, this horse looks to me like he's just better than these other horses. Even if he's a short price, I got 5 other legs I can make some money at. So I'll take the 4-5 single if that's what it takes. So it varies. Every ticket was different. There was no one type of ticket that I played in. It was always depending on what horses were entered that day, what their odds were, how likely they were each one to win, what kind of feel I had for the race, because some races you have no feel for. There's 10 horses in the race. They're maiden claimers. We're all racing first time on the turf. They've all had one start, and those you don't know what's going on in those races. You can't play all 10 horses, so some races you just have no feel for. And sometimes it's a 5-horse field, and they all look pretty close, and you got no feel for that race either. So you have to make sure you got some opinion to use when you're making these tickets out.
So if you had a race like that 10-horse race you talked about, would you hit the all button if you like the other 5 legs?
I almost never hit the all button, because once you start using the all button, your tickets get very, very expensive. And if you spend some time handicapping, you can almost always eliminate somebody. Now, sure, sometimes you eliminate the 30-1 shot who would give you the whole pool, but that's life. You cannot use every horse that might win. Sometimes you got to eliminate, a short price horse too that you think can win. Because let's face it, let's say you're playing an exacta and you're using the first choice, the third choice, and the fourth choice. Who's the most likely horse to beat you? The second choice. The one you knew could beat you is the one who's probably going to beat you. You still can't use them. You can't use every horse that could win. You got to narrow things down so you can actually make a ticket out. And everybody's amount of money they can bet is different. Now with these 20-cent tickets, you can use a whole bunch of horses that you never could use when it was $2. But still, you have to make sure you're not using everybody with everybody, because sure enough, there'll be 5 favorites winning and then a third choice, and the ticket pays nothing, and you wind up, putting in $2,000 and you get back $300. You don't want that.
So let me give you a couple more hypotheticals on that.
Sure.
I don't want to belabor it, but just get because these are kind of situations that come up a lot on the pick 5 or pick 6. Mm-hmm. Now pick 5s have become really popular. A lot of tracks offer a low takeout pick 5. It's not quite as hard to hit as a pick 6. They usually have a smaller minimum. So like if you come up to a race where there's like 2 standout horses, maybe one's a little bit better price than the other. In the pick 6, would you use both of those, or would you pick one? And if
it depends. It depends what else I have on the ticket. In the ideal world, I would take a stand and only use one, because that will enable me to use more horses in the other race. Besides which, if I got a 6-5 and a 7-5, if the 7-5 wins, it's not going to be some kind of gigantic thing that, I wish I had it. So sometimes I would use one. Sometimes I'd use them both. It just depends on how many horses I used in the other legs and what their prices were. If the horses in the other legs If I wanted to use some real long shots, I'm going to have to go short somewhere else. You can't go long with you just can't make tickets that way because you're going to get killed when the obvious horses win. Let's face it, most races are won by shorter priced horses. More than half the races are won by the favorite or second choice. So you can't willy-nilly just be using every 30 to 1 shot in sight because you don't have a good feel for the race. But I would rather, in that situation, pick if I liked one better than the other, I'd just use the one so that I could go wider and deeper in the other races.
Right, because you're cutting your cost of your ticket in half, right? One versus two. So that's a lot.
Because everybody's got different amounts of money they can play, whether it's a pick 5 or a trifecta. Everybody has to figure out what their bankroll is, how much they can afford to play, how much they want to play, and then they have to decide that accordingly. It's not just, well, there's a bunch of horses going to win, I'll just make a gigantic ticket and hit, because maybe you make a gigantic ticket and you hit and you get basically nothing back. So you don't want to do that. On the other hand, if there are horses that are prices that you think could get there, you want to try to work a ticket out so they're on that ticket. You don't want to be cutting the 12 to 1 shot you think has a decent chance. You'd rather cut the 2 to 1 shot you think is going to be overbet.
And then because that creates a lot more value in the ticket.
Because, pick 6 has value, pick 5 has value, trifectas have value. It's not just picking the winners or the first, second, and third of the race. Is it going to get you some money? I'll give you an example. Some people like to box. They box like 3 favorites in the trifecta. Well, favorites only run third 12, 13, 14% of the time, and they kill your ticket when they do that. So why would you ever use a horse in third if he's 6 to 5? You might use him as a key to win. You might use him for second with certain horses. You might not use him at all, but don't use him for third. So you have to learn little nuances like that because you want to make some money in this game. You don't want to just cash. There's a lot of people that say, well, I'm going to use everybody so I can cash a ticket. I don't want to feel like I'm not cashing a ticket. So let me bet the 6 to 5 horse to show, so at least I'll cash something. Why would you do that? You want to do something that's going to make you money and is going to be worth playing. And that's what you have to wait for those situations. And they're not going to take place in every race.
All right. So I'm going to ask you a few other topics, cover a few other topics. One of the things, and this really they were already in the game when you were still playing seriously, but they've really taken over the game here in recent years, and that's the computer, the CAW teams.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So maybe talk a little bit about that and how you think, what that means, and as a horse player, how you try to compete or combat that pretty sharp money that's become a bigger and bigger percentage of the pools.
Well, one of the charts I have here in the Skeptical Handicapper is the winning percentage of favorites and what they paid by the size of the field. And it turns out in 1998, 33.6% favorites, 2017, 36.9%. The price of the average winner went down from $485 to $450. That's a gigantic drop. And it was the same in each of the other field sizes. So these players that have come into the pools have really hurt prices because they're pretty sharp and they bet lots and lots of money. So yes, that's a problem. However, I had one of my best years when these teams were all, they were all the rage. They were betting. At that time, they were betting 20, 25% of the pool. They're probably up to 30% now. You can still play against them because you're an individual player, and you have certain advantages as an individual player. You can learn the nuances of your track in a way that they probably can't because they're using charts. Yes, they have some human handicappers, but that's not the same as somebody that concentrates on a particular circuit. You might know that a trainer had a big fight with his wife last night and came in drunk today and he's stumbling on, there's certain things that you're going to pick up by specializing in your own circuit that the big boys can't possibly know. Yes, they can overall do very, very well, and they do. And again, they don't have to win. If let's say if they lose 2% and they're getting 10% back, they can make a lot of money, putting a lot of money through the window. So they don't have to win to make money. Just as I told you with my win, place, and show numbers, you don't have to win to make money if you're getting a big enough rebate. But I would not worry about them particularly. I'd worry about myself. And if I can find something that makes me want to play a horse that is not getting pounded, that's better than if I simply follow the money that I believe these CAW teams are betting, because there's no real way to check what they are betting. Every time there was a big punch, oh, yeah, the computer guys. Oh, that's the rebate team again. But just because somebody's getting big rebates and they're computer players doesn't mean that they're winning all the time. It just means that they're pretty good and they're probably going to wind up winning. That doesn't mean that you can't win. Just because they win, that doesn't affect you. You can decide if you want a low price for a horse. You want a higher price, you bet a horse with a higher price. So I'm not worried about them as much as a lot of other people are. I know that some track executives are very happy that these guys are in the pool because they build the handle up, or they're very unhappy because they take money away from their own players. So I say if somebody builds a better mousetrap and beats me, good for him.
What about the the ability to make those last second plays that drive the prices down? How about would you suggest people deal with that? That the late odds changes that.
Well, become one of them. I always bet at the last possible second, always. So, I mean, I had my finger on the button. If a track didn't close the windows until all the horses were in the gate, I knew how much time I had to make the play. So whether I was making a phone bet or a computer bet, I was ready to go as late as possible. I rarely bet with, on the screen, it would say 0 minutes to post. I never bet when there was 10 minutes to post. I mean, except for maybe a pick six or something, but certainly not a win, place, or show bet. I wanted to see the late odds as much as possible, which is why if you go to the track and you're taking this seriously, and I want to discuss that in a second, you want to sit at a place that you can make instant bets, or go to a window where you can get there early enough and you just wait, let people go in front of you so you can bet at the last second. You should not be betting with 10 minutes to post because you don't have enough of a feel for what the odds are. But that brings me to another question, which is, I know you have all kinds of people listening to this podcast. You have people that are professional players. You have people that go to the track once a week. You have people that go to the track once a year and just like horse racing. I think every player has to decide how seriously he wants to take this. Because frankly, if I go to the track once a week with my buddies and I like to bet, $10, $20 a race, I don't want to spend hours downloading stuff, printing stuff, going through Ragozin numbers and Brisnet sheets and things like that, watching replays. I don't want to do that. I want to decide how much time I want to spend on the sport. And if it's just a hobby and I'm betting smaller money, it's not worth my time to do all the work. If I want to do this seriously and try to make a serious profit, there's a lot of work that has to be done. And you can't shortcut that work. Because if you don't want to watch replays, there are a bunch of people that are watching replays. If you don't want to keep trainer stats, there's a bunch of people that are keeping trainer stats. Now you can buy certain things that people compile. And if you can buy something that's accurate, that's great. But a lot of times you're going to have to do certain things by yourself. And just remember, if you decide you want to take this path, you're going to spend a lot of hours at it. You may not necessarily be successful, or you may make a small amount of money. Your home life is not going to be improved when you're spending all this time doing gambling research and doing the betting. So this is a very important decision. I loved horse racing, and I still love horse racing. I still sometimes I'll flip on Twin Spires and just watch miscellaneous horses race. I don't know who they are because I just love the sport. But if you want to do this seriously, you have to decide how much time you want to spend and how much money you want to spend and how much money you may want to throw away at the beginning while you're still learning. Because I think it's a good idea to bet real money when you're learning, but bet very, very small real money. Don't bet the money you're going to eventually be betting, because you can get into big trouble betting too much money when you don't really know what you're doing, as I did.
So if you're a new player, bet money just so you get that feedback, whether it's good or painful.
Exactly.
Keep records. You've talked about. What are some other pieces of advice you'd give for those, starting players and just getting started up in the game?
Well, learn as much as you can, and that means you may listen to the track analyst analyzing a race on TV. You might buy something like Today's Racing Digest, which analyzes all the races. You might read a newspaper columnist who's doing stuff. You might read the stuff in there. Try to learn as much as possible about the sport and what's going on in the sport and why people select horse A and why they select horse B. And then let's say you read an analysis, well, this horse should be here and this one should be doing that. Then you watch the race and say, okay, what happened? What happened that was surprising? Was some horse in a spot I didn't think he would be in? How did he get there? Did he place himself there? Or did the jockey make him go there? Why did he pull out at that part of the race and not at a different part of the race? Learn why horses win races and at least learn your local horses. Learn who they are. I got to the point where I could pretty much tell you what numbers I had on the horse without even looking at my computer because I knew those horses so well. And the better you know your local horses, and when I say local, let's say you play Hong Kong, then you got to know all the Hong Kong horses. If you're playing an out-of-state track, learn all those horses. So watch races, learn why horses win races, try to pick up stuff and read everything you can. That means read handicapping books, read columnists, read the racing form, read the selections by the local guy at the track, especially if he gives you reasons why to watch Andy Serling analyze a race. Learn what you're doing. And when you learn what you're doing, you're going to improve because you're going to have more knowledge. Then you'll start understanding, oh, that horse is in the wrong spot for him. He could have been in this other spot. I'll throw him right out. You'll learn stuff like that.
So that's great. What do you think are, maybe the biggest mistake that players early on, or maybe even after they've been playing for a while, make, that if they could correct that would probably have the biggest impact on their results?
That's an easy one. Most people play too many races. I mean, I can't tell you how many race books I've been in where people are just jumping out of their seat every 2 seconds to bet, oh, there's a race coming on over Gulfstream, let's bet that one. Oh, there's a race over Delaware Park, let's bet that one. So they just bet too many races, and when you bet in too many races, you can't handicap enough of those races to really have a feel for what's going on in that place. So you need to cut down. So let's say, for example, I want to bring $300 to the track. Now, instead of betting 30 races at $10 a piece, yes, I'll have a lot of action, but am I going to make money? Probably not. I'd rather bet my 3 best races $100 a piece, and maybe one day bet 300 on one race, and maybe it varies from day to day. But cut down the number, because you're not going to have an opinion on every race. I don't care how good a handicapper you are. Some races are just going to be not handicapable by me. I know that already going in when I open up the form each day. That race is not going to work for me. I can tell that already, because sometimes it's because it's too obvious. My numbers, let's say I have 2 horses rated 14 and 113 and 112. And those are my highest numbers. And the 14s are the favorite and second choice. The 13s, the third choice. The 12s, the fourth choice. I'm going to have nothing to bet that race. So I'm not going to waste any time on that race. On the other hand, if I get a race where the horses are so terrible, those horses that run zeros at Turfway Park and they're the favorite, those kind of horses, some races are just not handicapable by whatever methods I use. So I don't even bother with those races. And also when something is obvious, you're not going to make money on the race. When something is not so obvious, you have a chance to make money on the race. And yes, if you're playing the maiden claimers, maybe on the turf, maybe you're going to get some pedigree ratings, but so is everybody else. You're not going to get an advantage by doing that. You think you are, but all the teams are using the same stuff you are. So I think you have to be selective and be judicious in which races you play. I would rather go to the track, and I've done this where I played 2 races the whole day. I like both horses. They both were overlays. I made big bets on them, and they both lost. And that was over by the 6th race. Well, I would still stay and watch the 7th, 8th, and 9th races, but with no bets. And I didn't try to make up for something I lost earlier in the day. Too bad, so sad. There's always another day. So don't start fishing for races where you have no opinion on the race, unless something outrageous comes along like that 42-1 shot I mentioned, where the horse was just so ridiculously out of whack, I had to make a bet on him. But that's not going to happen very often. I would say that might happen. To me, that might happen once every 3 months, where a race I had no intention of playing, I wound up betting. Every other race I played in the morning, I thought I was going to play that race, or I thought I might play that race.
So I want to follow up on two things you said. One was you kind of touched on, well, if it's obvious, what I call the way I put it is, if it's in the DRF, it's in the price. And I think that's kind of what you're hinting at, that factors that might have impact a horse's chances of winning, but are baked into the price, aren't really that valuable. It's finding something that's not baked into the prices. Am I interpreting what you said right? And do you want
Absolutely. I explained that in the Skeptical Handicapper. I said there are certain factors that people used to use that some of them are still used today that are of no value whatsoever. For example, who had the fastest time last race? Well, whoever had the fastest time is going to win more than whoever had the second fastest time and more than the third time, but it's already baked into the price. So there's the ROI is the same on those horses. There's no advantage. Same thing with earnings per start. It's already baked into the price. So don't use factors where everything is already baked in. Look for stuff that's not so baked in, which could mean something like learning the body language of these horses, learning the subtleties of particular trainer specialties at your track, certain things that happen in replays that maybe are not mentioned in the charts. Like, let's say a horse is racing fifth most of the way, but he was between two horses, and they were basically in a 3-horse duel all the way around behind two horses that were way in front. That's a lot different from sitting fifth when there was no other horse around. Things like that. So you're looking for things that are not baked into the price, because if something is obvious to everybody, if they see a horse has got, 2 buyers of 90, nobody else in the race has a buyer over 70, well, great. The horse is 2 to 5. Congratulations to you. What are you going to get from that? Nothing. You're looking for a situation where maybe a horse doesn't have the best numbers, but he looks like he's coming into form, or better yet, it looks like the race suits him. One of my biggest scores I made was on a horse that was 30 to 1, written by a jockey that nobody's ever heard of, with a trainer that wins 3 races a year. I've been watching this horse. He was a turf horse. I've been watching him, and every time this horse tried to go for the lead, somehow he got pushed wide and disappeared on the first turn, or another horse right next to him went for the lead. All kinds of bad things happened to this horse, race after race after race. Well, one day he draws the rail. I say, you know what? If this jockey is smart enough to just bang this horse out of there as fast as he can go, this horse might lead all the way. The horse was 34 to 1, went wire to wire. Don't think he ever won another race, but he was in the situation where it's set up for him. And that's what I'm looking for, things that set up for him, or situations where it's not obvious. There was another horse I remember who was racing over his head week after week after week, because he was with a trainer who was mediocre, who always overplaced his stock. But the horse actually raced good. He raced good for him. He was very consistent for what he did. So yeah, he'd finish 4th, 5th, 6th because he was overmatched all the time. So, and he didn't have a real defined racing style. He didn't go for the lead. He wasn't a big company. He was just kind of a plotter. Anyway, he got dropped into a race where I said, you know what? He's actually the best horse in this new race. And he went off at 4 to 1, and I had the horse like 6 to 5 because he was the best horse. He just ran his regular race, didn't do anything special. And I made a big score on a race where everything was in the form to see, but people discounted it because there was nothing exciting. And people want excitement. They want to see that big buyer. They want to see, the jockey's got 24% wins. I got to follow that. Oh, the trainer's won 3 races this week. He must be hot. That's what people want to see. I want stuff that people are not looking for particularly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing, you kind of touched on this, but I want to talk a little bit more on sort of how you size your bets. Did you bet more on strong opinion? How did you size? Were you kind of betting the same amount all the time, say to win place?
No, I was not betting the same amount all the time, because you can bet more on shorter priced horses than you can on longer priced horses, because of the losing streaks that go on with longer priced horses will deplete your bankroll very quickly if you run into a losing streak. I mean, sometimes favorites will lose 20, 22 races in a row. Now, imagine if you're betting 15 to 1 shots. I mentioned this earlier. When you're betting long shots, let's say you're betting pick sixes, and you spend $200 on your pick six each week. Of course, now you'd be betting less because they've cut the prices on these pick sixes. But for $2 tickets, that would mean you'd have 100 tickets each time. You could go a whole year and never hit, or you hit and you get back basically nothing. You can have very long losing streaks when you play high-priced horses or high-priced exactas. So if you're betting the same amount on those as you are betting on a 7-5 shot, a bad streak is going to put you in big trouble. I'm not talking about if you're in the the Breeders' Cup betting channel. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about contests. I'm talking about on a day-to-day basis trying to make money. So I would bet more on the lower-priced horses, more if there was a big discrepancy. For example, if I made a horse 7-5 and he went off 2-1, maybe I bet 600 on a horse. If he went off at 5-2, I might bet 800. If he went off at 3-1, I might bet 1,000. There's a limit, of course. You can't bet 20 million on the horse because you could be wrong. But that was one factor: is how low I made the horse, what odds I made on him, what odds he actually went off. Those were my major criterion. Not how much money I had in my pocket. Not that I win the first and second race today. Not am I on a hot streak or a cold streak. Not, oh God, I got to pay the rent. None of that. It was always based on what price I made the horse, what he went off. So I was betting less. If I made a horse 4-1, he went off at 7-1, I bet a certain amount. But it was not going to be the same amount as if I made a horse 4-5 and he went off at 7-5. I always bet more on the shorter priced horses. Yes, what we'd all love to do. When we see a horse paying $50, we wish we had 1,000 to win on him. And when we see our favorite that we bet lose, we wish we had $2 on him. It doesn't work that way. It'd be nice if it did.
So what kind of range are we talking about? Like from 1 to 100 times? And like, is it like what your biggest like serious bet versus your smallest? If your smallest, is it 10 times the big one 10 times as big as your small bet, or what kind of range? How big of a swing?
Well, for a particular day, I might bet as little as 200 on a race. I might bet 1,500 on a race. I might bet 2,000. The biggest bet I ever made, I bet 3,500 on a horse. I looked at this race, and I said, this horse is not going to lose this race. I made him big favorite. He wound up being even money, which I thought was a steal for this horse. So, of course, he led every step of the way until the very final step when the horse was sat behind him, stuck his nose out there for 1 second, and that was the end of that. So you're never guaranteed to win a bet. So you can't start making these crazy bets just because you love a horse. You can't do it. You have to decide how much money, if it didn't happen the way you wanted. You thought there'd be a big meltdown and there was no meltdown. Well, you can't be betting half your bankroll because you have a good feeling about that race. You have to decide how much you're willing not to win, but to lose, because sometimes you're going to lose these bets. So how much can you lose without it throwing you off for the whole? I mean, if I lost $1,000 bet, I wasn't happy, but it wasn't going to kill me. But if I had bet 5,000 on a horse and he did nothing, I'd be very, very sad. I didn't like being very, very sad. I'd like to go home saying, okay, I made my good bets. I didn't make stupid bets. And that's that. I can't guarantee the outcome. I can only guarantee my process, not the outcome of the race.
So what is the odds range where you typically find the most overlays? I mean, the majority of your bets are in what kind of a range of odds? Is it more towards the short end, the long end, somewhere in between? I'm just curious, where do you typically, what's that price where you can find it? I know it can be across the whole spectrum, but typically where your bets at?
Well, I would never bet a horse to win if he was under even money. That was my floor. So even if I thought if he went up at 4-5, I think he should be 1-2. Not good enough. I didn't want to be playing at that level. Didn't want to be playing those super low priced horses. But I did bet 6-5 shots and 5-2 shots and 4-1 shots and 6-1 shots. It varied from day to day. There was not any particular thing I was looking for. It depends how the race is set up. Some days the races, I said, gee, I got 3 long shots today. I'm not sure how this happened, but it happened. So those are the horses I'm looking at. Other days, okay, this looks like those 2 races look very chalky, but I don't think the crowd's going to bet as much as I believe these horses are worth. And let me also look at the exactas and the tries and things like, or the doubles, whatever I was looking at. because I like to look at every pool. And one reason I like to look at every pool is it told me what the final odds of these horses are going to be, especially the last few years with these big odds changes. So I would check what the I see some tracks are doing this now, putting it up on the board. Our projected price based on what the pick threes are paying and what the doubles are paying and what the exactors are paying. He looks like he'll be 5-1. I always did that in my head before every race, so I would have some idea what I was getting. I didn't want to be surprised with a late odds drop, which fortunately didn't happen very much because I pretty much knew what those horses were going to be. And I think it's important to get a feel for that as well. But I bet them in all levels. I probably bet more horses at 5-2 than I did at 8-1, and more horses at 4-1 than I did at 12-1. But certainly, I was not averse to playing a horse at a big price if I thought he shouldn't have been such a big price. I first learned that at the harness races. There was a race I remember, and again, I was very young at the time. I was no more than 17. There was a stakes race, and I narrowed it down. There was only one horse I thought could win. However, there was another horse shipping, like from Indiana at the fairs or something. I said, well, this horse I'm not sure about, but he looks like he might be a decent horse. He went off at 16-1. So, of course, I played the horse I thought was the best horse, who was even money. And, of course, idiot me, he finished second. The other horse won the race. And that's when I said, I'm never doing that again. If I have two horses I like, I'm going to look at the prices. And I looked at the prices from then on and never looked back.
So in that case, now you would just play the 16-1 shot? Is that what I interpret that? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Now, if you're getting a price, you go for that price. And if you're right, you're going to make a lot of money. And if you're not right, so what? He was 16-1. You took a shot.
Even if he was maybe a little less likely to win than the...
Oh, no. I often bet my horses that were my second choice or third choice, depending on what the odds were. I mean, if I had horses that, let's say I had a couple of horses I thought were lukewarm favorites and they both got pounded, but my third choice was higher than I thought. Like I thought he'd be 4-1. He winds up going off at 6-1. And the two horses I thought were going to be 5-2 are both 6-5 and 7-5. I would say the heck with those two 6-5 and 7-5s. I bet the other horse because I thought he was an overlay and those horses were underlays, and I would try never to bet an underlay no matter how much I liked the horse. It didn't matter how much I liked the horse.
So did you find that typically those overlays were not on your top most likely winner and on the second or third, or did it kind of just even out? I'm just curious because
I would say overall probably more than were my top choice than were my second or third choice, but there were plenty of times it was my second or third choice. I just wanted to make sure I was not betting horses that I thought were going to be overbet. That's mostly what I wanted to avoid. So if I had a horse at even money and he wound up going off 3-5, I was not betting that horse no matter what. I mean, if he won, he won. Let him win without me. There's plenty of other races coming down the pike. I don't have to bet every single race. So I got to get a decent number. That doesn't mean I'm chasing 25-1 shots because usually, I mean, the public has a very good feel for what prices should be. Their favorites win more than their second choices. Their 2-1 shots win more than their 3-1 shots. Their fifth choice wins more than their sixth choice. So the public's got a pretty good feel. So when you're playing against the public, you got to have a little bit better feel for that particular horse in that particular race. And certainly I'd rather bet a 25-1 shot than a horse that's 6-5, obviously. But those horses don't come along that often who have legitimate shots to win the race. But when they do, I'm happy to play them.
So how far would you go down, like your list? Like what's the lowest percent chance of winning that you'd play a horse to win? I mean, do you go down to your fifth or sixth choice?
No. I always had the horse had to be 6-1 or lower on my line. If he was higher than that, there's too many chances of making an error. Like if I had to was 20-1 and he goes up at 30-1, well, maybe I should have had him 25-1 because 20-1 is 4% of the pool and 25%, or has a 4% chance. 20% only has a 5% chance. There's 5 and 4 are too close, so it's easy to make a mistake on that. So not too many horses are going off at crazy prices I thought were good. But if the horse was, let's say I made a horse my 4-1 third choice, that's a horse I might be betting, depending on if the crowd let him go at a higher price. Not at a 9-2 price, but as a 6 or 7 or 8-1 price. Yeah, I would bet those horses, even if they're not my top horse. Absolutely.
Yeah, and certainly if they're 20-1 and you think you have 9-2, you'll bet it. But
well,
you're
if he's 20-1, I never thought of a horse as dead. Some people say, well, nobody's betting him, he must be dead. No, nobody's betting him until I go to the window, then somebody's betting him.
Yeah, but it sounds like your kind of rule of thumb is 6-1 on your line. If they're higher than that, you might use them in exotics, but that's probably not a horse you're going to unload on in a win bet.
Right. Well, 6-1 is 14% on the odds line, which is some reasonable chance to win the race. Whereas when you have a horse that you've made 30-1, he has such a slim chance to win the race. You're going to lose a lot of money waiting for him to come in.
Yeah, that's the other part, is the losing streak part you talked about. When you get down to 10% or less, you can hit some pretty long losing streaks if that's the only type of horse you bet. But you're kind of like 6-1 or better on my line. I'll look for the value. If I don't find it, I pass the race. If I find it, I play it.
Exactly. And, I'm looking at the other pools too. I'm looking at the double pool. I'm looking at the exacta pool, because sometimes horses are bet stronger in pool A than they are in pool B. So I'm looking to see where I'm going to make my most money for the bet that I'm going to make for that race. And sometimes it's not in the win pool. Sometimes I'm only betting exactas that race. Sometimes I'm only betting doubles that race. It just varies what's available.
So this one, I'm just curious. You talked about the place and show pools versus the win pool. If you see a horse that's say an underlay or at least not an overlay in the win pool, but it's a big overlay or underlay in the place and show pool, does that mean you'll want to play the pool where it's an overlay, or is that does that like an automatic play, or do you think, well, maybe it's sharper money in the win pool versus a place pool? I mean, how do you sort through that, or do you even factor that in?
Well, almost all the place and show bets I made were on horses that were under 5-1. I rarely would bet a long priced horse to show, because first of all, they run, yes, a 14-1 chart runs third more than he wins, but those prices are cannibalized by the other horses in the race. So you rarely get a decent price on these long shots to show. Those horses you should bet to win. But other horses, yeah, occasionally I say, gee, this horse is the favorite in the win pool, but he's only the third choice in the place and show pool, and is 30 seconds to post. So I would try to get in there before somebody else would, kind of correct that number. Probably there's more correction being done now for people that are, playing all those pools, but not every one of these computer teams plays every track in the world. They're playing, some of them are playing some tracks and some are playing a lot of tracks. But yeah, they're good. I got one time I was playing the pick six. I was at Santa Anita, and when you had to mark your cards, and this guy and his partner, they came with this gigantic stack of cards. There must have been 200 cards they filled out, and they weren't, $2 cards. They were cards with a bunch of combinations on them. And so I was talking to the guy. He says, "Yeah, our team put 50,000 into this pick six." So they were big bettors before, before the players that are playing now. But they're the horse still has to win the race. And if you disagree with what's being bet, that's the time to play. You got to trust your own opinion, not the guy who works for the racing forum, not the guy in the newspaper, not the guy on the radio, or not the guy in the podcast. You got to use your own opinion. And if your own opinion is good enough, you can make some money. If your opinion is not that good, keep working at it to make your opinion better. And keep records. My God, you got to keep records. If you don't keep records, you have no idea how you're doing. So, because we all like to delude themselves. We all believe we're better than average bettors, like we all believe we're better than average drivers. We're better than average parents. We're better than average repairmen. That's the way people think. And I was seeing a survey last week. They asked a bunch of college professors, are you average, below average, or above average? The college professors, who you think would know better, 94% said they're above average. So we have a tendency to write our own narrative, and our own narrative is always happier than real life. Like, oh, I didn't lose that much today, when you actually lost a lot of money. Oh, no, I'm a winner at the track. Well, if you don't keep records, I'm working under the assumption you're not a winner. If you don't know exactly how much you've bet and how much has come back to you, how do you know that you're a winning player? I mean, what is a winning player anyway? I asked a question like this in my book, And I want to see if I can get to the exact thing, but I can tell you roughly. Is a winning player somebody who bets $3 million, loses 100,000, but gets back 200,000 in rebates? Or is a winning player somebody who bets $100,000 and makes $45 for the year? Is a winning player somebody who never wins, but enters a contest, dials up some 30 to 1 shot in the last race and wins the contest? I mean, you got to define for yourself, what's the winning player? What's winning for you? What does that mean? For me, it was winning enough to pay all my expenses. Now, yes, I was doing some other things at the time, but always the majority of money I had was from gambling, not from writing about gambling or selling my numbers or anything like that. It was always from the gambling part. So if I was not gambling well, I couldn't do it. I couldn't very well delude myself, when the mortgage payment was due, saying, well, I'll catch you next month. No, it doesn't work that way. You got to make the money, and you got to know you're making the money. And if you're not, work on it to get better. It's like Jamie Foxx was asked once, what can black actors do to get more Academy Award recognition? So he answered, it was a joke, of course, he answered, act better. And that's what we got to do as horse players. We got to get better. We got to keep learning and not stop learning. Keep reading, keep watching replays, keep listening to other people that are pretty sharp that can tell you things. There's a lot of smart people in the world. Don't be deluded by, let me give you an example of something which is not useful. TVG a lot of times will have a stretch run of a horse's previous race. If you don't know who was in that race, what odds they were, who was supposed to be where, what that horse did, what the fractions were, it's worthless to look at that thing. Everything is in context. It's not just a miscellaneous piece of information. Well, Joe Smith is a good trainer, so I'm going to follow Joe Smith. Maybe this is not his specialty. Bob Baffert on the turf was an automatic throwout for years. He was very good on dirt, couldn't win turf races. Go figure. So you have to have reasons for what you're doing, which means you have to keep learning and studying. Now, if that sounds tedious, I don't think it was ever tedious when you're learning something new. I love watching replays. I could watch replays and make notes on these horses and never get tired of doing it. Of course, you can't watch, 3 weeks worth in a day, but you can certainly watch a couple of days in a day and make your notes and learn and doing it that way. I remember in 1998, I took off 2 months from horse racing to play blackjack in every casino in Nevada, and I wrote a book about that called Blackjack Autumn. Well, here was what you didn't hear in the book. When I got home, since I was gone for 2 months from races, I had to watch 2 months of tape at the tracks that were running. Do you know how tedious that is to get up to speed and to work on the numbers? I did it. If you don't like doing it, maybe you got to figure out some quick, maybe you can buy one of those systems those guys sell that if you add 2 points for a class drop and subtract 3 for an odds change, you can be busy with your yachts for the rest of your life. But that doesn't work that way in real life, unfortunately. You got to do the work if you want to make the money. And I've listened to some of your guests, and they all tell you pretty much the same thing. You want to get good at this thing, you got to spend time at it, and you got to work at it, and you got to learn stuff. And if you're learning every week, and new stuff happens all the time. There was a very famous gambler I knew that learned. I don't know if you remember when Aqueduct allowed turn downs, those shoes that you could, like cleats, that you could allow.
Right.
Anyway, that only lasted for about a month before they figured out those were a huge advantage. Well, this guy had an assistant at the track to call him with which horses are wearing turn downs in this race, because it wasn't announced anywhere and wasn't listed anywhere. So the assistant's at the track telling him which horses had turn down. This guy was doing nothing but betting all these horses. He made 7 figures in 1 month. He was a very big bettor. But simply having this one piece of information that other people didn't have was a gigantic advantage. So anytime you can get some information that other people don't have, it's good to have it. And remember, your opponents, the CAW players and the other big players, they're getting this information. So if you want to beat them, you better be up to speed.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the record keeping and trying to improve. Well, you may even, without records, you may know you're good or bad just because you're winning or losing money. But you might discover through the records is maybe you're pretty good or really good in certain kinds of races or certain kinds of bets, and you're really bad at others. And just that self-awareness and changing, where your knowing where your strengths and weaknesses are, you can really improve your results, but you need the records to be able to.
Yeah. What I did when I first started, I was writing down like the conditions of each race that I bet. Was it a 20 claimer? Was it a 50 claimer? What was it? Eventually I stopped doing that because I figured out what I was good at and what I wasn't good at. However, you have to be very careful in drawing conclusions off of small sample sizes. So let's say, for example, you bet 10 maiden races and you lose all 10. That doesn't mean you can't bet maiden races. It just means you lost those 10 races. Maybe you're going to win the next 10. I mean, sometimes numbers can be very misleading. Do you remember the Kentucky Derby in the 1980s through the 1990s? Every single race was won by not the favorite. So turf riders glommed onto this and said, well, you throw the favorite out in the Kentucky Derby. Well, it turns out 6 of the next 10 derbies were won by the favorite. So, the streaks go on for no reason other than that's the way math works. So you have to make sure you have a big enough sample to know what you're doing. And one exercise I recommend everybody do when they start, put prices on horses. How often do you think this horse can win out of 100 times? So you give this horse a 20% chance, this horse a 10% chance, and then see exactly how many did do that and how many were overlays and how many were underlays. Do that for 2 weeks. Don't do it for 8 months. Do it for 2 weeks, every single race at the track, and you'll have a very good idea how accurate you are at making lines for races. Because if you're not accurate at making lines, you don't know if you've got an overlay or not. If you are accurate, you'll know if you have an overlay. So that's the skill you want to work on, making lines, figure out what percentage chance each horse has. You can convert them to odds if you like, or just use the percentages, and see what percentage of those horses actually won and how many of those were overlays and underlays. For example, if you have 2 horses at 4-1 in your line, and one of them won and paid $30, and the other one lost and paid $280, or would have paid $280 or something, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's when you have a lot of races you can tell how accurate these lines are. Don't just do it for a couple of races. Do it at least for 2 weeks. That's all. I don't ask you to do it forever. You'll have a very good idea how accurate you are at determining horses' chances of winning, because that's the main skill you have to succeed at this game. What chance does each horse actually have? And then you compare that chance to what odds you're being given, and that's how you're on the road to success. But if you can't make an odds line, you don't know what chance these horses have, you really are kind of flying blind in this game, and you don't want to be doing that. I mean, all the teams do the same thing. They all have people making odds lines or computers doing odds lines, and they bet off those things. And that's what we want to do also.
Well, you mentioned Blackjack, so I'm assuming if you did this 2-month Blackjack tour, what did you learn from Blackjack that you, if anything, that kind of carries over, to thoroughbred racing, if anything?
Well, there are 2 different things altogether with different rules, and you're playing against the house, and half the battle, if you're good players, to make sure they don't kick you out for being too good a player. So it's a whole different world. Here, you may get kicked out by a bookmaker, but you're not going to get kicked out by the track. Although a few years ago, just for fun, I made a couple of big show bets, not big, they were $2,500 show bets on entries that were, like 1 to 5 entries. And I got a letter from ExpressBet saying, don't do this anymore. You're taking advantage of the fact that we allowed you to bet these races. So, of course, I turned that letter over to the Daily Racing Forum, and they wrote a scathing article about how they were preventing players from playing, which was not very good for their image. But normally you don't get kicked out playing at the pari mutuel window, so that's good. You might get kicked out by a bookmaker, but not certainly not at the track and not through your ADW. Blackjack, you're always at risk for getting kicked out. But Blackjack also has certain things. You can't overbet your bankroll. You have to pay a lot of attention. You have to learn every single play in the game. You have to learn how to count cards. You got to work at it and study. So it's grinding to some extent. And of course, it's not exciting like horse racing. Horse racing, when you watch a horse race, even if you don't have a bet down on the race, it's great to watch these horses run. I mean, I love horses. I drive along and I see horses in a field. I'll stop my car. I'll go, hey, come here, horse. I'll go over and pet him. Which you're not going to do that with a deck of cards. So I always liked horse racing as my favorite sport, horse racing and harness racing, and not the blackjack so much, although I still play blackjack every once in a while now, just to kind of, keep my hand in.
Well, you did mention, though, blackjack betting's not a whole lot different than sports betting. Have you ever been involved in sports betting? Are you currently involved in sports betting? Or
No, I might be the only horse player in history who's never bet the Super Bowl. I don't bet sports because I know guys who do bet sports. I was with a guy once at a sports book who was a professional gambler who I knew. He's looking at the board. He says, that number's good, 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 good. Oh, that number, I got to look at that number again. That number does not look good. Good, 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 good. Oh, that number's no good for sure. I'm going to go bet that number. It's the same thing in horse racing. Are the numbers good or the numbers not good? So you have to understand what that is. But I didn't know enough. I didn't know how I can get an edge playing sports. I didn't know enough about it. I didn't want to learn. I was already doing something else that I enjoyed. So as a result, I love watching football games. I've never had a bet down on a football game, even though I love watching football. So I might be the only person who goes to a football game and doesn't have a bet down.
so you're not going to be betting the Super Bowl here?
No, I'll be watching the Super Bowl because I like watching football. But gambling, no. I only gamble on things I believe I have an advantage on. Like I don't play poker because I know a flush beats a straight, but I don't know too much else about poker. So, and I know there's a big learning curve. So I don't want to spend the time trying to learn that game, which I might not even be successful at anyway. And it's really the same with sports betting. A game doesn't mean more for me if I bet $100 on it or I bet nothing on it. I'd just rather watch the athletes.
So one other thing you mentioned, I just want to follow up on you. You mentioned the Breeders' Cup betting challenge. Have you ever participated in any contests? And if so, anything that you want to offer about that?
Well, I was actually in a couple of contests, although I would say it's very, very rare. There was a free contest one time, I think it was at Hollywood Park or Santa Anita, where if you could pick one horse to show per day, you'd stay in the contest day after day after day. So it turns out after 24 days, I was in first place. I had the most horses, and there were several thousand people in this contest. Unfortunately, the next day, the horse that I liked to finish in the top three wound up fourth, so I was eliminated. And it turned out the next day, the one they all bet on, who I did not like at all, ran out of the money. So I was one day off on that one. Other than that, I was in one contest once, but I learned what I did is when contests first came in, I read the rules very carefully, and I said, in most of these contests, this is not really, it's not a handicapping skill contest. It's a question of being right at the right time on some long prize tours as a rule. And that's the way these contests usually are, which is if you make a giant score, so people are winding up betting, they're betting 10,000 on a straight exacta, which they would never do at the track. And if it wins, they win the whole contest and they win all the big money. So it's interesting because I looked at the results of last year's Breeders' Cup betting challenge, and 80% of the people wound up with less money than they started. And of course, a large percentage wound up zero, which doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong. It means they are betting their whole bankroll, which you're supposed to do in these contests. But the guys who win contests one year may finish 190th the next year. And the guy that finishes 82nd one year can win the next year. There's a huge amount of luck involved because you have to make that one big bet at the right time. They don't have contests anymore, which they used to have. Okay, all you can bet is $2 if a horse is over a certain price. But I learned certain things about how to play contests, but it didn't interest me because I didn't see where I would have an advantage over anybody. I don't know the horses who race in Maryland or who raced in New York or Florida. I don't follow those horses, so why would I bet those horses? I didn't know who they were. So no, I'm not. I was never a contest player. I did enter one of Los Alamitos for fun. It was some like a $10 entry fee or something. I said, I'll enter this thing, and of course I wound up somewhere in the middle. But who cares? I didn't see where there was an advantage for me playing these contests. And I remember, I think it was Brent Sumter who said, I finished second this year, and if I had finished third, I would have lost money with all the contests I had to play. So it's not, I don't see it as a way to make money. I see it as a fun thing for people with a lot of money who really don't mind losing it and don't mind entering 20 contests a year, even if they lose them all. And if they happen to qualify for the final, they see their friends. It's great. They have a great time. There are people that love that. And I say more power to them and, good luck in the contest. It just wasn't something that was interesting to me. But just because something is not interesting to me doesn't mean it may not interest 27 million other people. I'm not a gigantic fan of rap music, but I know there are millions of people that love it, and I say more power to them.
Well, yeah. So not a big part of your play. So, you retired about 10 years ago. Is that right? From being a professional player?
It was 2011, right? It was almost 13 years ago. It was in the middle of 2011 at Belmar. That was my last actual bet, serious bet.
So you're still playing some, it sounds like recreationally, not professionally.
Well, sometimes friends will say, hey, you want to go with us to the track today? So once a year I might go to the track, and I'll look at the form like anybody else. I have no particular advantage because I don't know those horses. There is one little contesty thing I do. I play promotions sometimes at some of these ADWs. If you bet a certain amount and your horse doesn't win, they'll give you a bonus back. Well, I did the calculation. It's a big player advantage. Unfortunately, you can only bet $10 on a race unless you're one of these wise guys who uses 6 computers with 6 email addresses and they're trying to cheat the system. But if you're like me and say, no, I'll play it honestly, I can all they let me bet is $10 a race on those things. So it's worth about maybe each year it's worth about $1,000, $1,500, something like that. It's not worth any kind of large money, but it's kind of a fun thing because I'm betting horses I don't even know. I don't handicap. I just say, okay, I'll bet $10 on the favorite. If he doesn't win, but he wins second or third, I'll get my $10 back, and that's the advantage of that bet. It's actually a good thing. But no, I don't. When I first was retired, I was playing carryovers and mandatories sometimes, but I was playing at tracks I didn't know, and I had no success doing that. I mean, every once in a while I did something for some money, but nothing that I could depend on. I said, why am I even doing that? I don't know those horses. I have no advantage over any of the why should I play Woodbine carryover when I don't even know those horses? I'm looking at the racing form like everybody else. I have no edge. If I have no edge, I don't like to play.
And you primarily got your edge because you focused on 1 or 2 circuits and you really knew those horses and you knew things about them
exactly
that most of the players didn't.
Right. I specialized in those circuits. I knew those horses. I knew those trainers. I knew those jockeys. I didn't have to worry about inside information. I made my own information and I studied them carefully. I watched all the replays. I handicapped every day, made lines every day, and watched these horses every day. And I bought the stuff I needed to buy, workout reports and things like that I couldn't do myself. But almost everything else I did myself. And I was not dependent on somebody else for my selections and for my choices. And that's exactly the way I like it. But I could not, go to New York tomorrow and say, I'm going to be king of New York. I don't know those horses. It would take me months to learn who they are and learn the nuances of the trainers. And what am I going to do for those months? I'm getting old. I can't really spare that kind of time anyway. And there's no guarantee that I would win anyway. So I'm happy I retired. I have plenty to do every day. I'm never bored. I always have a lot of things to do. And I like my life now. And so when Breeders' Cup rolls around, I'll probably watch them on TV, but I won't handicapping. I won't bet. I'll just say, oh, look at those nice horses. And that'll be fun for me. I'll enjoy that. I won't have to say the next day, oh, man, I would have won that $6,000 trifecta. If I'd used that one horse. He was my last elimination. The kind of stories people tell every day. I don't have to tell any of those stories. And you know what? I don't have to listen to any of those stories either.
Yeah, for sure. Unless you get on social media, and then you can hear thousands of people tell those stories.
No, I stay off all social media. I don't even go on Facebook. That's how retro I am.
That's probably wise. I don't heed that advice, but that's probably very wise. So if since you're not on top of the game, but still following it, I mean, you're kind of aware of where the game is today, and certainly you were intimately involved for a long time. if I usually ask the guests if you had like a magic wand that you could wave to make some change in the game that made it better, or one or two changes, what would be those changes? What do you think could really improve the game? Maybe it's really hard to do or impossible to do, but if you could, you'd change.
Well, the first thing you got to slash the takeouts, and then you got to make them available. You got to make rebates available to all players, not just the big players. Of course, the big players would get more of a rebate, but everybody would get something. So you get rewarded for playing. And the takeouts are just too high. I mean, who's going to beat a 25% takeout, which some of these tracks have on trifectas and pick fours and stuff? The takeouts is just too high. So that's got to go for sure. And then there's got to be, information for people. Everything has to be easily able to be discovered. You shouldn't have to. Not long ago, I mean, within the last couple of years, there was a pick five carryover at some turfway, some track like I don't know, some track I had no idea who the horses are. I said, well, I'm looking at this thing. Maybe I'll make a small just to give them just. I couldn't find out which races were the pick five at this, but it might have been two. I couldn't figure out, was it the early pick five or the late pick five? I looked on the website, nothing. I looked on the other ADW, nothing. I looked on the track's site, nothing. There was no way to find out. So here's what I did. I called the track. I asked for the racing office a couple of hours before post, which races are going to be the carryover for the pick five today? Which pick five has the carryover? So I'm listening, and guys are going, hey, Jimmy, do you know which race, where the carryover is for the pick five? How about Bob? Does he know? This is the kind of amateur hour we're dealing with at some of these tracks where they don't provide the information for people and they expect you to guess and they want you to gamble, a lot of money and don't tell you all the things you should know. So that's a big problem. Also, the lack of information. I don't need to go to a website and say today's hat day. I don't care about hat day. I care about making money. So let me know how I can make some money. Give me the trainer standings. Give me the some things that are going on. Give me a guy who goes to the workouts and analyzes the workouts for me. That's what I want to know. I don't want to know that today's hat day. I don't care. So that's one big change I would make is more information for players, for sure, and takeouts. Also, exchange wagering. Bring back the exchanges. They're a fantastic thing for players, whether you bet on horses or against horses. What happened? The horsemen were scared. They were scared that exchanges would steal all the money, which is not the case. When I was playing the exchanges, very often I bet races at the track through the windows or through the ADWs because maybe the odds were too low on the exchange. Or maybe, hey, I think I'll handicap that race because it looks, I just discovered something. I wasn't going to handicap it before. Things like that. You should be able to bet on any race anywhere. Some states still have regulations. You can only bet on this state, but not that state. Or this track, but not that track. You should be able to bet everywhere. And that's a big problem. But I think if they cut the takeout to 10 or 12%, heavily advertised it, and allowed rebates starting even at 1%, something, if you bet $1,000 a month, some kind of rebates, that would be helpful. The TVs at tracks need to have updated odds all the time. One time I remember I was at Santa Anita, first day of the meet, and I'm looking for the prices over at the Northern California track because they had simulcast betting. All the TVs were on Santa Anita. So luckily I saw the track president and said, hey, can you tell somebody to maybe put one TV on the track that you're taking bets on in the north? That sort of stuff should never happen, and yet it does. Why do you have to wait for exactas to come around? 4-1. Okay, I'm playing 8-3. I got to wait for the 5. Have a grid. It's not that difficult. Some tracks have grids. Makes it very easy to see what all the exactors are paying all the time, not just one number at a time. Things like that. Mostly stuff that would be helpful to players, give them more information, and give them a better chance to win. These tracks that have these 4 and 5 horse races that nobody wants to bet are not really helping anybody. You got to have larger field sizes, maybe fewer races, maybe fewer tracks. But unfortunately, The odds are updated so late. You have horses' odds getting updated after the race has already started. That should never happen. But who wants to put the money up to change that? Nobody. You have other things where a guy is suspended in state A for drug violations, and he's perfectly okay to race in state B. That's wrong. That shouldn't be going on. I mean, I could go on with a whole bunch of stuff like that. And I've been on committees. I've talked to track executives. I've talked to the California Horse Racing Board. And let's face it, it's hard to get things done sometimes. People don't want to spend the money or they don't want to take chances. I thought exchange wagering was going to be with us for a while, and I probably would not have quit if they had kept the exchanges going, but I decided that was a big part of the money I was making, so that was it for me.
Yeah, they're not everyone is familiar with the exchanges, but everybody that I know that has played them is a big fan. And like you said, sometimes there's some liquidity issues, but it does give you the opportunity to bet, in a lot of ways that you can't do through the pari-mutuel pools. At least you can do right now. So,
well, remember the exchanges I was betting, they had win betting only. Although Betfair at some point allowed place and show, but nobody bet on those things anyway. So it was just a win pool we're talking about. The other pools you had to bet through the track or through a bookmaker. There was no exact exchange betting. So the bets that people were making were not even on the exchange. So I mean, yet people were afraid. The trainers were afraid. The executives were afraid that they'd get cannibalized. And I actually had a guy over who was trying to get an exchange started, who had been a high-ranking executive at one of the tracks. I said, sit with me for an hour, watch what happens here, watch how this works. And I wrote up a little report for him. I said, this is going to help your business so much if you can get this off the ground. They could never get approval for it. People are afraid of things. That's the way it works in the world. People are afraid of change, and it would have been a great change for players. And anything that helps players helps the sport, because that is how the sport is financed. There's states that don't have racinos that get a bunch of money. And some of these states that have racinos, if there was no racinos, the tracks would go out of business in 5 minutes. And maybe at some point, those state legislatures are going to say, why are we giving money to the racetracks when we can use it for health care? And that's going to happen. So those subsidies are going to go away, and then what's going to happen? So we can't say this is a growing sport. When you look at the handle numbers are not growing, which is too bad, because there are certainly ways for this thing to get bigger. And exchange betting, to me, is one that's really been overlooked and has been ignored and should have been a key to our game here.
So sounds to me like the two big ones that I heard you say were reduce the cost of the wager, either through lower takeout, or increasing rebates for all players, and then exchange wagering as kind of a growth opportunity to kind of juice up the handle.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, the guy that's losing with a 20% take may not be losing with a 15% take. So he's going to bet a lot more money with a 15% take than he would at 20. It's simple economics. The lower the takeout, the more money is going to be bet. So why keep the takeouts high and discourage people from betting? Because people run out of money faster when there's a high takeout. It's kind of obvious. That being the case, there should be there's got to be some bold action to make some changes here. And unfortunately, that's not usually the case in any kind of large organization. Things go very, very slowly. And this is something that horse racing needs quickly. Why is handle now no bigger than it was 20 years ago? That's not very good, is it? Think of inflation. It should have been way up, shouldn't it? Not the case.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to shift to a more positive question. I like to have players kind of share their a memorable score. It doesn't have to be your biggest score, but one that you look back on fondly when you're in that losing streak and you want to pump up your attitude. So, what's a memorable score that you want to share?
Well, I've had some good days with the pick six where halfway through the pick six, I go, you know what? This thing actually could pay. If I can just get a couple of these other horses in, this could be some money. So the pressure builds to the sixth race. One time I had put a pick six in and left the track, but a friend of mine was still at the track. So I called him up as the last leg was getting underway. I said, I got a single in this race. If this horse is fifth at the quarter, he's a winner. He was a closer on the turf, and the race set up in a certain way for him. I said, if he's fifth at the quarter, he's a winner. Guy says, I don't know what you're talking about, but okay, great. Okay, so leave me on your phone and call it to me live. So he's calling the race, and sure enough, the horse is fifth at the quarter. Horse goes on, hits the top of the stretch, and blows by the field and wins easily. And it was a score for six figures. And I said, this is a very satisfying day for me. I laid the ticket out. I made some decisions. I made the right decisions. It just tells me I can do this. So don't get discouraged when you have losing days and losing photos and things like, horse savaging another horse with 20 yards to go, or your jockey falling off at the last minute, or a horse about to blow by when suddenly some other horse drifts out and crashes into him. Forget all those things. Think of the good days. Think of your victories. Think of winning again. Get yourself in a good frame of mind, because tomorrow is another day, and tomorrow might just be a big winning day for you.
I just liked what you said. It was kind of like a horse player's prayer, that tomorrow could be the day where you make a score or something like that.
Every day,
write that on your.
Every day is a new start. Every day you open up that racing form, because you don't know who's entered until you start looking through the form and you go, aha, that race looks like I can make some money at. And there are enough of those that that exist that keeps horse players ever optimistic. And if you can be optimistic and you're a winning player, that's the best combination of all.
That's a good note to end on. So before we go, though, anything else that we haven't covered that you want to mention or talk about?
You're saying I have dementia? Oh, you wanted to mention. I see.
Yeah. That you want to, anything we didn't talk about that you'd like to touch on before we wrap it up?
Well, I think each person has to make a decision how committed they are to doing this. And for most people, this is a very pleasant hobby. They have a certain small amount of time to work on their hobby, and they should enjoy themselves. And if you're not enjoying yourself, maybe not do this. But if you are, you enjoy horses, you enjoy racing, you enjoy gambling, then just keep at it as long as you can.
I like that. So with that, we'll wrap it up. I want to thank you, Barry. This was great. Very enjoyable 2 hours. I'm glad we got through the technical difficulties early on, and I'm sure all the listeners are going to really enjoy this. And I want to thank all of them for supporting the show and for all the kind words we get and the feedback. And please continue that. And may you all boldly go where no horse player has gone before.